Welcome to Reclaiming Me, a trauma-informed podcast helping women with complex PTSD heal the lasting impact of childhood attachment wounds from parents and caregivers, so you can finally release people-pleasing and perfectionism and learn to trust in relationships, beginning with the one you have with yourself. I'm your host, Cindy Payne, therapist, trauma specialist, and a woman who has walked this path both personally and professionally.
I want to start with a moment that I have never said out loud on this podcast before. I was early in my counseling career, still finding my footing, still trying to figure out who I was as a clinician and what I had to offer. And I became aware of someone in my field doing similar work, writing about similar things, who just seemed to have it figured out in a way that I just did not. And the platform was there, the clarity, the confidence, the ease. And as embarrassed as I feel saying this out loud, I felt that hot, uncomfortable, instantly shameful feeling of envy. And I did what I think most of us do. I immediately tried to talk myself out of it. I told myself that I was being petty. I told myself that I should be inspired and not envious. I told myself that this person's success had nothing to do with mine, and that a rising tide lifts all boats, and all of the other inspirational things that we say to ourselves when we are desperately trying not to feel what we are feeling. And underneath all of that talking, the envy just sat there quietly waiting. And then there is this other kind, the one that lives closer to the bone. I grew up watching other people's families from a distance, not literally in a creepy way, but in that way that children with complex home lives learn to watch. The families that seemed easy, the kids who moved through the world without that low hum of hypervigilance that I carried in my body everywhere that I went. The people who seemed to arrive at adulthood without the particular weight that I carried into mine. And I felt something about that too. Something that was part longing, part grief, and part a shame so deep that I didn't have a name for it for years. And then there's this one, which I have to be honest, I have not experienced myself, but I hear my clients talk about it and I definitely understand it. And this is friendship jealousy. I think that this is the one thing that gets talked about the least, but it's felt by the most people. And it's this particular fear of being replaced in a close friendship, of watching someone that you love and care about turn towards someone new and feeling that cold, specific dread. Am I losing this, or am I being left behind? And then the shame that my clients describe that followed the fear almost before the fear has finished arriving. And these are the emotions that we are talking about today. Today, we are going into territory that I think is genuinely underserved in conversations about trauma and healing. And that is envy and jealousy. What they actually are, why they hit so differently for those of us with CPTSD, and what they are trying to tell us when we are brave enough to listen. And here is what I want you to walk away with today. Number one, envy and jealousy are not the same emotion, and the distinction matters more than you might think, especially through a trauma lens. Number two, for CPTSD survivors, the shame spiral that follows these emotions is almost more damaging than the emotions themselves. The feeling is not the problem. the war that we wage on ourselves for having it, that is where the real suffering lives. And number 3, what you envy is not evidence of your worst self. It is a compass, and it is pointing towards something true and important about what you most deeply long for. Okay, let's just dive right in. I want to start here because I think that the conflation of these two emotions, envy and jealousy, is part of what makes them so hard to work with. And when we use them interchangeably, they are actually describing very different experiences. And I hear this all the time in my office, and I really feel passionate about doing some education about these. And I can't say that I came up with this distinction myself. So I give credit to Brené Brown when she wrote her book, Atlas of the Heart. She has done some of the most precise and accessible work on this distinction in this book. So if you have not read it, I cannot recommend that book highly enough. And here is what she says the distinction is about envy and jealousy. Envy involves two people, typically. It is this painful feeling of wanting something that someone else has. So that could be a quality, an achievement, a life circumstance, like a level of ease. It is fundamentally about longing for something. And it almost always carries shame with it because we have been taught that wanting what someone else has makes us a bad person somehow. Jealousy, however, is very different. It involves 3 people. It is the fear of losing something you already have. So, a relationship, a connection, a sense of belonging to a third party. It is fundamentally about threat. And it almost always carries shame with it too, because we have been taught that jealousy means that we are insecure or clingy or too much. And Brené Brown describes envy as being about wanting what someone else has, and jealousy being about fear of losing what we have to somebody else. And she's really careful to say that both are normal human experiences. Both are painful, and both deserve our curiosity rather than our contempt. And I find that when working with clients and talking with family and friends, it's saddening to me on some level when people cannot get curious enough about this in order to do the work to change something about it. So that's why I felt so passionate about today's episode on this. For CPTSD survivors, I want to add a layer here because both of these emotions are rooted in the relational. They arise in the context of other people, in the context of belonging and longing and fear of loss. And complex trauma is at its core a relational wound. It was shaped in relationship. It lives most loudly in relationship. And so these emotions, envy and jealousy, tend to carry an extra charge for us, an extra layer of intensity, an extra freight of shame. And so let me take each of these 3 threads that I shared at the beginning and go a little bit deeper because I think that they map onto experiences that many of you will recognize. And the first is professional envy. So watching someone in my field who seemed to have it easier, more figured out, more together than I felt. And what I understand now that I didn't understand then is that this particular flavor of envy was not really about her. It was about me. It was about a part of me that had worked so hard for so long to earn belonging and credibility and a sense of okayness in my professional identity. And that was still not sure I think, on some deep level that it had arrived. And so really the envy that I was experiencing was pointing at that unresolved question. And the question was, am I enough? Have I done enough? And I guess maybe the frightening question, or the most frightening question of all for me, will I ever feel like I have? And for CPTSD survivors, those questions have deep roots because they were planted in homes where worth was conditional. For some people, love was not guaranteed. And we learned to work harder and perform better than everybody and shrink ourselves and expand ourselves in whatever way seemed most likely to secure the safety and the belonging that we needed. And that learning does not stop at the office door. That learning follows us in. And sometimes it looks like envy. And the second is the longing for ease. So that particular grief of watching people move through life without what felt like the invisible weight that I carried everywhere. And I really want to name this one carefully here because I think it is one of the most misunderstood forms of envy there is. It is not about wanting someone else's specific life, I don't think. I think it's about longing for the experience of not having to work so hard just to feel okay, to feel safe, to feel like the ground beneath you is solid. Brené Brown talks about how envy involves a sense of lack. So this painful awareness of a gap between where you are and where you wish you were. And for those of us who grew up in environments that required constant vigilance, that gap is not between us and a specific person. It is between the life we are living and the life that we might have lived if our nervous systems had been shaped by safety rather than survival. And to me, that is not petty. What that is, I think, is grief. And it deserves to be honored as such. And the third is the friendship jealousy, which again, I think out of all the things that I did experience growing up, I somehow managed to dodge this one. I don't know what it was. I think maybe in hindsight, when I look back at my grandmother's experiences and like watching how she formed female friendships, I saw healthy modeling of that. She had a crew of women surrounding her that she would play tennis with and golf with almost daily. She had a very stable, robust support system, and she did not model jealousy. So there was no, triangulation going on as far as that goes in my home. And so I just didn't learn to be jealous. But I do want to spend a little extra time on this because I think that it is the form that carries the most shame. And again, it gets talked about the least. The fear of being replaced in a close friendship, of watching someone that you love form this new connection and feeling that like what clients will describe as cold, like specific dread. This is an attachment response, full stop. So it is your attachment system doing exactly what it was shaped to do. And that is scanning for threat to the bonds that feel the most essential to your survival. And for CPTSD survivors, that scanning is not a personality flaw. It is this highly trained skill that developed in environments where connection was unpredictable, where people you loved left or turned away or became unavailable without warning, where you learned that closeness was not something that you could count on, and that if you wanted to keep it, you had to work hard for it. You had to watch for it. You had to protect it. And so when a close friendship shifts, when your person turns towards someone new and you feel the jealousy rise, I think what is actually happening is that your nervous system is running a very old, very familiar threat detection program. And it's saying, am I going to lose this? Am I being replaced? Am I not enough to make this person stay? And again, those questions are not crazy. They are not evidence that you are too much in the relationship or too needy or too insecure. It's just an echo of an early experience asking to finally be seen and soothed. And again, for me growing up, I had a couple of really close friends, and I'm still friends with them today. In fact, two of them are my ride or dies. We just have this secret language almost. They have known me since I was, well, one of them 6 years old. And they've seen me at all different stages and phases in my life. And these are the types of friendships where we can support each other up close and from afar. And there's just this understanding that it is a secure attachment. And because I've experienced this with them from my formative years on, I think it just got really solidified in there that these were two women that they weren't going anywhere and they weren't changing at their core. And I wasn't either. And even though we've had roads in our life that have taken us to different places, we always find our way back to each other with the understanding that there is no threat and there's no competition. We just genuinely want so much for one another, and it's safe. It's safe in a way that I've not really probably ever experienced in any other dynamic before with female friendships. And so, again, just because I haven't really experienced the jealousy bug quite as intensely as maybe some of my friends or clients have, it doesn't mean that it's not still common and it's not still valid. And it also doesn't mean that there's something wrong with you in friendships, right? I can say for me personally, though, that if I am in a dynamic with somebody and there is a high level of envy or jealousy, or maybe both, that becomes really difficult over time, in my opinion, to maintain that friendship. I mean, there's got to be a lot of work, I think, done on both of your parts, not just one person, in order to keep that bond close. And there has to be a lot of honest conversations. And for me personally, I have to kind of weigh a lot of different factors. And part of recovering from people pleasing and perfectionism, I think, is healing that part of yourself that feels like you are the culprit and that you are the one responsible for fixing it. And so I think that that's one of the biggest healing pieces of work that I've done over the years, is to radically accept the relationship for what it is. And again, if you've tried every which way and you feel like you're just doing all the work and it's not being reciprocated, then I think you have to look at the relationship you have with acceptance and what is it that is not allowing you to see this for what it is and thank it for what it taught you, and figure out the right place in your life for that relationship to be. So that is my take on the envy and the jealousy as a person who has lived with complex trauma. And here is the reframe that I keep coming back to and that I find genuinely transformative when I'm able to access this in the middle of the discomfort. What you envy reveals what you most deeply want. Not what you want in some shallow comparative sense, not just like, I want what she has, but what you want at a deeper level, what you are longing for, what your inner life is pointing toward when it uses envy as its language. And when I felt envy towards the person in my field who seemed to have it figured out, what I was really longing for, I think, was ease. I was longing for a version of this work that didn't require me to prove myself at every turn. I was longing to feel settled in my own professional identity. That's what it was. And that longing was completely legitimate. And if I had been able to stay with the envy long enough to hear it, I think it would have told me something true and useful about what I needed to give myself. So when I felt that grief-tinged envy towards people who seemed to move through life without the weight that I was carrying, I think what I was really longing for was rest, a nervous system that could exhale, the permission to stop working so hard just to feel okay. Also completely legitimate, also pointing somewhere real. And when friendship jealousy has arrived in my life, not from me personally, but on the other side, so that fear of being replaced, of losing the closeness in that relationship, I think what's really going on there is longing for reassurance, not just from the friend, but from within yourself. So reassurance that you are lovable enough to keep. Reassurance that you wouldn't always be left. Reassurance that you're someone worth staying for. But again, I'm going to put this out there that if you are a person who is experiencing high levels of that, I think you have to ask yourself the honest question, what is my responsibility in this relationship? So what is the work that I have to do? Because I don't think that it is fair or loving to expect the other person to heal that wound for you. Like that's your work, right? And Brené Brown writes that the painful part of envy is not just wanting what someone else has, but the implicit belief that we are lacking something essential. And I think that that's exactly right. The envy is not the wound. The envy is pointing at the wound. And the wound for most CPTSD survivors is some version of I am not enough, I will not be chosen, I will be left. And the healing is not to stop feeling the envy, but the healing is to get curious enough to ask what it is pointing toward. And then to turn toward that longing with some of the compassion that you've probably given to everyone else in your life before you gave it to yourself. So let's make our way back to where we started. Number one, envy and jealousy are not the same emotion. Envy is about longing for what someone else has. Jealousy is about fear of losing what you have. And both are normal and both are painful. And both are far more common among CPTSD survivors than most of us realize or admit. And number two, the shame spiral that follows these emotions is almost always more damaging than the emotions themselves. Envy and jealousy are not evidence of your worst self. They are evidence of a nervous system that learned to track the threat and longing in a world where both were very real. And this deserves your compassion. And number three, what you envy is a compass. It is pointing towards something that you most deeply want. And that longing, however it arrived, whatever shape it takes, is worth following. Not with comparison and shame, but with curiosity and care. And these emotions have taken me a long time to be willing to look at directly. And when I could finally do this, I was not my worst self when I uncovered it. It was some of my most honest longing. And I truly hope that it is what you find too. And I will just say one final thing about the amount of work that this requires. And it has to be, I think, a mutual understanding between the person who you are in relationship with and yourself. And if either one of you is so buried in the shame and you're not able to name it, and bring it to the forefront of the relationship, then I personally don't think that the relationship is that sustainable on a deeper level. And so I would ask you, if you're on the receiving end of the jealousy or the envy, or maybe you yourself are experiencing that, what do you need to get honest with yourself about? So what is your longing? Or if you're on the other side, what capacity do you have to carry the weight of that from the other person? And when you can get clear about that, then you can start to make the changes within yourself and your own relationships to put these relationships in the place that they belong and set down the extra baggage that you've been carrying. And perhaps that's the work that other people need to do. So, if any of this landed for you, I really want to hear about it. And if you have questions about envy or jealousy or attachment, CPTSD, anything, please send them in for me for the Ask Me Anything episode, which is coming up at the end of the summer. You can DM me at Cindy Payne Rooted or email me, and both of those links are provided in the show notes. And the midweek reframe this week is going to give you one question to carry into your week that I think has the potential to genuinely change how you relate to what you envy. So come back for that and take really good care of yourselves. And I'll see you back on Wednesday for the midweek reframe. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you for spending this time with me today. I hope you leave feeling a little lighter, a little more grounded, and a little closer to trusting yourself and your inner experience. If this episode resonated with you, please follow or subscribe so future conversations can meet you when they're needed. And if someone came to mind while you were listening, consider sharing this episode with them. That's one of the ways this work reaches the people who need it the most. You can find me on Instagram at Cindy Payne Rooted, and you can also visit me at cindypayne.com, where you'll find all episode links, blog posts, practice updates, and a free people-pleasing style quiz designed to help you notice your patterns with more compassion. And remember, every small step towards healing, self-trust, and presence matters. You are worthy of this journey. Thanks, everyone.